Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you love stories with unexpected twists, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It was a quiet evening in the small town of Willow Creek. The sun had just begun to set, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and orange. A cool breeze moved through the trees, rustling the leaves gently. The park was peaceful, with only a few people walking along the paths, enjoying the fresh air. Sarah Carter walked slowly, her hand resting lightly on the harness of her guide dog, Shadow. He was a strong, well-trained Belgian Malinois with deep brown eyes that watched everything around them. His ears were always alert, listening for any signs of danger. Sarah couldn't see the world around her, but she trusted Shadow completely. He was more than just a guide dog, he was her protector. Most people who saw Sarah thought she was weak. They saw a woman who couldn't see, walking carefully, moving slowly. They thought she needed help. They thought she was helpless. But they had no idea who she really was. And they had no idea what Shadow was capable of. Have you ever seen someone completely underestimate the wrong person? Let me know in the comments. Sarah had been blind since she was a child. She lost her sight in an accident when she was only 6 years old. At first, everything was scary. She had to learn to do things in a new way, how to walk without seeing, how to read using her fingers, how to tell where she was by listening closely to sounds around her. It was hard, but Sarah never gave up. Her parents always told her, "You are stronger than you think." And they were right. She learned to move through the world with confidence. She learned how to listen better than most people. She could tell if someone was close by just from the sound of their footsteps. She could tell how tall someone was by the way their voice echoed. Even though she couldn't see, she noticed everything. And she never, ever felt afraid. Not with Shadow by her side. Shadow was not an ordinary dog. He had been trained by the U.S. Navy SEALs. Before he became Sarah's guide dog, he had been on dangerous missions. He had worked with soldiers, protecting them, finding threats, and even saving lives. He was fast, smart, and incredibly strong. But now, he was retired. And his new job was taking care of Sarah. From the moment they met, Shadow understood her. He knew how to lead her safely. He could tell when she was happy or sad. And most importantly, he knew when she was in danger. Shadow didn't bark much. He didn't need to. He communicated in other ways through small movements, quiet growls, or even the way he stood. Sarah could feel his energy through the harness. If something was wrong, Shadow would let her know. And tonight, something was wrong. Sarah walked along the paved path in the park, listening to the world around her. She could hear the sound of children playing in the distance, laughing as they ran around. She heard the soft chirping of birds settling into their nests for the night. The wind rustled the leaves above her, creating a peaceful, soothing sound. Shadow walked beside her, steady and calm. She took a deep breath. It was a beautiful evening. But then something changed. Sarah didn't know what it was at first. It was just a feeling. A shift in the air. A tension she couldn't quite place. Shadow slowed down. His body stiffened just a little. Sarah felt it immediately. She held the harness a bit tighter. Someone was watching them. Sarah turned her head slightly, as if listening to the wind. But she wasn't listening to the wind. She was listening for voices. Footsteps. Movement. And then, she heard it. Low voices. Laughter. Not the happy, carefree kind. No. This laughter was different. It was cruel. Mean. And it was getting closer. Shadow let out a soft, quiet growl. It was so low that no one else would have noticed. But Sarah noticed. She knew what it meant. A group of men stood near the park's entrance, leaning against their motorcycles. Their engines rumbled softly, waiting to roar to life. There were 4 of them. They had been laughing and joking, but now, their attention had shifted to her. Sarah could feel it. Even without seeing them, she could feel their eyes on her. One of them muttered something. The others chuckled. She could hear their footsteps as they started moving toward her. Shadow took another step forward, standing a little taller. His muscles tensed beneath his fur. Sarah kept walking, pretending she didn't hear them. But they weren't going to let her go that easily. "Hey, lady." Sarah's steps slowed. The voice came from one of the bikers. It was rough, unfriendly. "Need some help crossing the street?" One of them called out, laughing. Another voice spoke up. "Nah, she probably don't even know we're here." The men laughed. Sarah kept walking. She didn't respond. She had dealt with people like this before, people who thought she was weak, people who thought they could scare her. She wasn't scared. Shadow let out another low growl. This one was just a little louder. Just enough for the men to hear. There was a pause. Then, one of them stepped closer. The man's boots scraped against the pavement as he moved toward her. Sarah didn't stop. But Shadow did. He came to a full stop, blocking her path. Sarah's hand tightened on the harness. She could feel his body, tense and ready. "What's the matter, lady?" The man sneered. "You lost." More laughter. Sarah tilted her head, pretending she was just listening. "You sure that mutt can protect you?" Another man said. "Looks like he's just a pet." Sarah took a deep breath. And then, she smiled. It was a small, knowing smile. The kind of smile that said, "You have no idea who you're messing with." The bikers laughed again, but this time, there was something nervous in their voices. They had seen Shadow stop. They had heard his low growl. But they still didn't understand. One of the men took another step closer. His boots crunched against the gravel path. Shadow's ears snapped forward. His muscles tightened. Sarah could feel the energy in his body change. He was waiting. Waiting for a reason. Waiting for a command. "Relax, lady," the man said, his voice dripping with fake kindness. "We just want to talk." Sarah took a slow, deep breath. She had to stay calm. She had to wait. People like this always made one big mistake. They thought she was weak. And they didn't know who they were dealing with. Shadow stood his ground, staring straight ahead. Sarah tilted her head slightly. She could hear the way the biker's jacket shifted as he moved. She could hear the faint jingle of keys in his pocket. She knew exactly where he was standing. And she knew exactly how close he was getting. "You should walk away," she said calmly. The man chuckled. "Oh yeah? And what if we don't?" Sarah smiled again. "Then you'll regret it." The bikers paused. One of them whispered something. Another one laughed, but this time, it wasn't as loud as before. They didn't know why, but something about this woman wasn't normal. Something about her felt different. But instead of backing off, the leader of the group made a very bad decision. He reached out. Everything happened fast. The second the biker's hand moved forward, Shadow exploded into action. There was no barking. No warning. Just pure speed. One moment, the man's hand was reaching for Sarah's arm. The next moment, Shadow's powerful jaws were locked around his wrist. The man screamed. His knees buckled as Shadow twisted his arm, forcing him down to the ground. The other bikers jumped back. "What the? Get him off me!" the man howled. Shadow held on, his sharp teeth barely breaking the skin, but his grip was unshakable. Sarah stayed completely calm. "Shadow, hold." The dog froze, keeping the biker's arm trapped. The other men stared in shock. This wasn't a normal dog. This was something else. Something dangerous. One of the bikers stammered. Hey, isn't that a military dog? Sarah tilted her head. Smart guess. The man gulped. Wait a second, is that a? Sarah nodded. A retired Navy SEAL K9. Yes. Silence. The bikers froze. Everyone in the military knew about SEAL dogs. They weren't just trained to attack. They were trained to kill. To take down terrorists. To fight in wars. And one of them was right here, standing in front of them, holding their friend hostage. Lady, please, the leader gasped, still trapped under Shadow's grip. Call him off. Sarah didn't answer right away. She wanted them to understand. She wanted them to feel what it was like to be helpless. To be at someone else's mercy. Just like they had tried to do to her. I warned you, she said softly. But you didn't listen. The other men were pale. They had come here to bully a blind woman. But now, they were terrified. One of them stumbled backward, nearly falling. We didn't know. He stuttered. We didn't know who you were. Sarah's expression didn't change. And that's the problem. You judged me before you even knew me. She reached down and touched Shadow's back. Shadow, release. Instantly, Shadow let go. The man jerked his arm away, scrambling backward like a scared animal. His friends rushed to his side, pulling him up. You're crazy. One of them shouted. Sarah tilted her head. Am I? They didn't have an answer. They just wanted to get away. The leader, still shaking, stumbled toward his motorcycle. He was breathing hard, his heart racing. Let's get out of here, one of them muttered. No arguments. They climbed onto their bikes, hands trembling as they gripped the handlebars. Engines roared to life. A second later, the bikers were gone, disappearing down the road as fast as they could. Sarah stood still, listening to the sound of their engines fading away. Then, she smiled. She won. Again. Shadow sat beside her, his ears twitching. Sarah reached down and ruffled his fur. Good boy. His tail wagged, but just once. He was still alert. Still watching. Sarah sighed and shook her head. Some people would never learn. They would always assume she was weak. That she couldn't take care of herself. But Sarah knew the truth. She had learned a long time ago that real strength isn't about what people see. It's about what they don't. And those who underestimated her? They never saw it coming. Sarah had grown used to people thinking she was helpless. She could hear it in their voices. The way they talked softly when they saw her. The way they gasped when she moved too close to the edge of a sidewalk. Some people even tried to grab her arm without asking, thinking she needed help. Sarah understood. People assumed she couldn't take care of herself. But they were wrong. And tonight was different. The peaceful evening air shattered as the sound of loud engines filled the park. Sarah could hear them before she could feel them. The deep rumbling of motorcycles. The sharp screech of tires. The sound of men laughing loud, harsh, and careless. A group of bikers had just pulled up near the park bench where she had been sitting. Sarah didn't move. She didn't have to. She could already tell everything she needed to know. Shadow, her faithful guide dog, stood beside her. His ears twitched. His body became tense. Sarah could feel his muscles tighten through the harness. He had sensed something. Something off. Then, she heard it. One of the men spoke. Hey lady, need some help crossing the road? His voice was full of mockery. Sarah didn't react. She just sat still, her hand resting gently on Shadow's back. Then, Another man chuckled. Nah, he said. She probably don't even know we're here. The others laughed loudly. Sarah remained calm. But Shadow? Shadow let out a low, almost imperceptible growl. It was so soft that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Sarah noticed. She always noticed. She reached down and touched Shadow's fur. Not yet, boy. Shadow stopped growling. But his body remained ready. The bikers had no clue. Sarah had heard men like this before. Men who thought they were tough. Men who thought they could say whatever they wanted and get away with it. And worst of all, men who thought she was weak. She could hear it in their tone. The way they laughed, as if she were some helpless little girl who couldn't even tell they were there. They thought they were smarter than her. Stronger than her. But Sarah Carter was not weak. And she was about to prove it. She could hear footsteps now. Crunching against the gravel path. Getting closer. One of the bikers stepped forward. His boots scraped against the pavement. Then, she heard the faint jingle of keys in his pocket. Sarah didn't move. She didn't need to. She could feel Shadow's body shift slightly. His head turned, following the man's movement. Shadow was watching. Waiting. Waiting for Sarah's command. What's wrong? The man taunted. Cat got your tongue. More laughter. Another voice spoke up. Maybe she's scared. Sarah smirked. If only they knew. She let out a slow, even breath. Then, she finally spoke. You should walk away. Silence. The bikers paused. Then, they burst into laughter again. Oh yeah. The first man sneered. And what if we don't? Sarah tilted her head slightly. She could hear the challenge in his voice. He wanted to scare her. He wanted to intimidate her. It wouldn't work. Not on her. Not with Shadow by her side. One of the bikers stepped even closer. Too close. Sarah could feel his presence now. He was standing less than a foot away. Shadow tensed. His breathing slowed. Sarah could feel his heartbeat through the harness. He was waiting. The man let out a mocking sigh. Man. I almost feel bad for her, he said to his friends. I mean, what's she gonna do? She can't even see us. Sarah's grip tightened on Shadow's harness. Her jaw clenched. These men were fools. They thought sight was the only thing that mattered. They didn't realize that sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room was the one they never saw coming. Sarah reached down and brushed her fingers against Shadow's back. She didn't say anything. But Shadow understood. His body language shifted. His tail lowered. His muscles coiled like a spring. It was a silent message. One that said, I'm ready. Sarah wasn't scared. Not even a little. But the bikers. They should have been. The man in front of her reached out his hand. Sarah could hear the way his jacket rustled as he moved. She could hear the faint creak of his leather gloves. She could feel his presence shifting closer. Then, just as his fingers were about to touch her shoulder, Shadow moved. But not all the way. Just enough. He stepped in front of Sarah, placing himself between her and the man. His lips curled slightly. His ears stood tall. And then, he let out a low, rumbling growl. This time, it wasn't quiet. This time, everyone heard it. The biker froze. He snatched his hand back so fast it was almost funny. What the? His voice shook. For the first time tonight, he was the one who felt helpless. The laughter stopped. The other bikers, who had been so confident, were now silent. They had underestimated her. They had misjudged the dog. And now they were starting to realize their mistake. Hey man, one of them muttered. That dog doesn't look normal. The leader took a step back. Lady, what kind of dog is that? Sarah smiled. It was a small smile, but powerful. She reached down, running her fingers over Shadow's fur. Then, she answered. A retired Navy SEAL canine. Silence. The bikers stared. Their faces drained of color. They had made a very, very bad mistake. The first move. The night air was thick with tension. Sarah felt it. Shadow felt it. The bikers. They didn't. One of the men stepped even closer. His boots scraped against the gravel. Shadow's body stiffened. Sarah could feel his muscles tighten through the harness. She knew that stance. It wasn't the stance of a pet. It wasn't the stance of a helpless guide dog. It was the stance of a soldier. And Shadow was waiting for her command. But the biker? He had no idea what was coming. You sure that mutt can even protect you? The man sneered. Looks like he's just a pet. Sarah didn't flinch. She heard the smirk in his voice. The arrogance. Then, she heard something else, the faint rustling of his jacket as he reached out toward her. His fingers were only inches away from her shoulder when Shadow moved. It wasn't an attack. Not yet. It was a warning. His ears snapped up. His body shifted slightly. A silent message. But the man didn't listen. The bikers laughed. They didn't see the warning. They didn't see the shift. They didn't see the way Shadow's paws dug into the ground, ready to launch forward. What's he gonna do? One of the other bikers jeered. Lick me to death. More laughter. Sarah tilted her head slightly. Her voice was calm. Steady. You should walk away. Silence. Then, a scoff. The leader of the bikers stepped forward. Or what? Sarah let out a small breath. A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. She wasn't scared. Not even a little. She could hear the way they shifted their weight. She could feel their movements. She could sense their arrogance. And she knew something they didn't. Her voice was calm. Or you're going to regret it? The leader rolled his eyes. Yeah? What's a blind lady and her little dog gonna do to us? Sarah's fingers brushed against Shadow's back. That was all it took. That tiny movement. And suddenly, Shadow lowered his stance. His tail stiffened. His head tilted slightly, locking onto the target. His body was like a coiled spring. The perfect attack position. But the bikers. They still didn't get it. The leader makes a mistake. The leader let out a chuckle. You're bluffing. Sarah simply shrugged. Try me. The leader sneered. Then he reached for her again. Big mistake. Because the moment his hand moved forward, Shadow snapped. It happened fast. Too fast for the bikers to react. 1 second, Shadow was still. The next, he lunged. His powerful jaw snapped just inches away from the biker's hand. Not a bite. Not yet. A warning. A clear, undeniable warning. The leader stumbled backward so fast that he nearly fell. His face turned pale. His eyes widened. For the first time that night, he looked scared. The shift in power. The other bikers froze. The laughter? Gone. The arrogance? Fading. One of them muttered under his breath. Hey man, that dog ain't normal. The leader stared at Shadow. His hands trembled slightly. Then, in a hoarse voice, he asked. What kind of dog is that? Sarah smiled again. But this time, it wasn't small. This time, it was full of certainty. She reached down, stroking Shadow's fur. Then, she answered. A retired Navy SEAL K9. Silence. Pure, thick silence. The bikers stood there, their faces slowly draining of color. A retired Navy SEAL K9. A war dog. A dog trained to take down enemies. A dog that had seen more battle than any of them ever had. A dog that could take them all down in seconds. And they had just messed with him. The realization hit them hard. And for the first time that night, they were the ones who felt helpless. If you were one of those bikers, what would you do next? Would you run or try to fight? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more epic stories. For the first time that night, the bikers weren't laughing. For the first time that night, they weren't the ones in control. A retired Navy SEAL K9. They had been mocking a dog that had taken down terrorists. They had been messing with a dog that had been trained to protect soldiers on the battlefield. They had been bullying a woman who was far from helpless. And now, they were terrified. The leader took a step back. "You're lying," he muttered. Sarah just tilted her head. Shadow stayed frozen, his sharp eyes locked on them. "Do I look like I'm lying?" she said, her voice calm and steady. No one answered. Because they knew. She wasn't lying. And suddenly, this wasn't fun for them anymore. The leader's desperation. The leader swallowed hard. His pride wouldn't let him back down so easily. So he forced out a laugh. "So what? You think we're scared of some old army dog?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Shadow isn't old. He's just experienced." She took a step forward. Shadow moved with her, his muscles tense, ready for anything. Sarah could hear the slight shuffle of their boots. They were nervous. They wanted to run. But the leader? He still thought he could win. "Let's see what this mutt can do," he snarled. And then, the attack. He lunged. A quick, clumsy attempt to grab Sarah's arm. But Shadow was faster. In a split second, he sprang into action. His powerful legs pushed off the ground. His body launched forward like a missile. His jaw snapped shut right next to the biker's wrist. Not biting. Not yet. Just close enough to make the leader freeze in place. Shadow's deep growl rumbled through the night. His teeth hovered dangerously close to the man's skin. One more inch. And it would be over. The leader didn't move. Didn't even breathe. Because in that moment, he finally understood. He was one wrong move away from disaster. The other bikers backed away. One of them stumbled over his own feet. Another let out a nervous, "Dude, we need to go." Sarah didn't say anything. She just stood there, her hand resting lightly on Shadow's back. She could hear the leader's shaky breathing. Could feel the way his body had gone stiff. Could sense the fear rolling off him like waves. Then, she spoke. Her voice was calm. Controlled. "I told you to walk away." The leader nodded quickly. "Why yeah, we're leaving." Sarah smiled slightly. Good choice. Then, she gave Shadow a simple command. "Stand down." And just like that, Shadow stepped back. But his eyes, his body, they were still ready. Still watching. Still waiting. The escape. The bikers didn't wait. They scrambled backward, nearly tripping over each other. The leader grabbed his helmet with shaky hands. Let's get out of here," one of them stammered. They rushed to their bikes, engines roaring to life. One last look at Sarah and Shadow. Then, they were gone. Sarah stood still for a moment, listening to the fading sound of the motorcycles. Then, she let out a small sigh and patted Shadow's head. "Good boy," she murmured. Shadow's tail wagged slightly. His job was done. Sarah turned, feeling the night breeze on her face. She wasn't afraid. She had never been afraid. Because she knew something those bikers didn't. She had never been helpless. She had always been in control. And with Shadow by her side, she always would be. She took a step forward. Then another. And as she walked away, she couldn't help but smile. Because she knew. Those bikers would never make the same mistake again. What would you do if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you let them go, or would you make sure they learned their lesson? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more thrilling stories. The leader of the bikers stood frozen. Shadow's powerful body blocked his path. His sharp eyes locked on his target. His muscles tense, ready to strike. The leader's breath came out shaky. His hands trembled. He finally understood. This wasn't just any dog. And Sarah wasn't just any woman. She was calm. She was fearless. And she was in control. The other bikers shifted uneasily. One of them muttered, "Dude, we messed up. We need to go. Now." But the leader? He wasn't ready to give up his pride. Not yet. He clenched his fists. His ego was still telling him he had control. That he was the alpha here. That a blind woman and her dog couldn't possibly scare him. He forced out a grin, trying to cover up his fear. "All right, lady. You got your little guard dog. But let's see what you can do without him." Sarah smirked. She knew his type. She had dealt with men like him before. And she knew exactly what was coming next. The leader took a step forward. Then he lunged. His hand shot out toward Sarah's arm. Fast. Aggressive. Overconfident. But Sarah? She didn't even flinch. Because she knew something he didn't. Shadow was faster. Before the leader could even touch her, Shadow moved. In a flash, he leapt forward, his powerful body slamming into the biker's chest. The leader stumbled back, gasping as he lost his balance. Then Shadow's jaw snapped shut around his wrist. Not a deep bite. Not yet. Just enough to lock him in place. Just enough to make sure he didn't move. The leader's eyes widened in terror. He tried to pull back, but it was useless. Shadow's grip was like iron. The other bikers stepped back, eyes darting between their leader and the massive dog. One of them muttered in shock, "Holy, that dog is trained for war." Sarah took a step forward, her expression calm and unshaken. She tilted her head slightly, listening to the leader's shaky breathing. "I told you," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "I warned you." The leader let out a strained grunt, his arm locked in Shadow's grip. "Oh, okay. Okay. I get it." He stammered. Sarah just smiled slightly. "Do you?" Shadow's grip tightened slightly. Not enough to break skin. But enough to send a message. The leader let out a small whimper. His pride was gone. His arrogance was gone. All that was left was fear. Real, raw fear. Sarah let the silence stretch. Let him feel it. Let him understand. Then, she spoke. "You think you're tough?" The leader swallowed hard. "And no. You think picking on a blind woman makes you powerful?" I swear, I didn't." Sarah leaned in slightly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What do you think Shadow would do, if I told him to attack for real?" The leader's entire body stiffened. His breath hitched. He knew. He knew what that meant. If Shadow actually attacked. If he actually bit down. There would be no escape. None. He would never stand a chance. And Sarah? She wouldn't even need to lift a finger. Because Shadow would do it all for her. The leader nodded frantically. Please. Just let me go. Sarah finally sighed. She gave Shadow a small, simple command. Release. And just like that, Shadow let go. The leader staggered back, clutching his wrist. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. He looked at Sarah. Then at Shadow. Then back at Sarah. His face pale as a ghost. I won't mess with you again. Sarah smirked. I know. The other bikers were already jumping on their motorcycles. They didn't need another warning. They had learned their lesson. Fast. The leader didn't say another word. Didn't even look back. He just stumbled toward his bike, started the engine with shaky hands, and sped off into the night. The others followed. Engines roared. Tires screeched. And then, they were gone. Running like cowards. Sarah let out a deep breath. The night was quiet again. Peaceful. Like nothing had ever happened. She reached down, giving Shadow a gentle scratch behind the ears. Good boy, she murmured. Shadow's tail wagged slightly. His job done. Sarah turned, walking away without a second glance. Because she didn't need to look back. She already knew. They wouldn't be coming back. Not now. Not ever. And with Shadow by her side. She never had to be afraid. What would you do if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you let them go, or would you make sure they learned their lesson? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more thrilling stories. The leader of the bikers stood frozen. Shadow's powerful body blocked his path. His sharp eyes locked on his target. His muscles tense, ready to strike. The leader's breath came out shaky. His hands trembled. He finally understood. This wasn't just any dog. And Sarah wasn't just any woman. She was calm. She was fearless. And she was in control. The other bikers shifted uneasily. One of them muttered, "Dude, we messed up. We need to go. Now." But the leader? He wasn't ready to give up his pride. Not yet. He clenched his fists. His ego was still telling him he had control. That he was the alpha here. That a blind woman and her dog couldn't possibly scare him. He forced out a grin, trying to cover up his fear. All right, lady. You got your little guard dog. But let's see what you can do without him. Sarah smirked. She knew his type. She had dealt with men like him before. And she knew exactly what was coming next. The leader took a step forward. Then, he lunged. His hand shot out toward Sarah's arm. Fast. Aggressive. Overconfident. But Sarah? She didn't even flinch. Because she knew something he didn't. Shadow was faster. Before the leader could even touch her, Shadow moved. In a flash, he leapt forward, his powerful body slamming into the biker's chest. The leader stumbled back, gasping as he lost his balance. Then, Shadow's jaw snapped shut around his wrist. Not a deep bite. Not yet. Just enough to lock him in place. Just enough to make sure he didn't move. The leader's eyes widened in terror. He tried to pull back, but it was useless. Shadow's grip was like iron. The other bikers stepped back, eyes darting between their leader and the massive dog. One of them muttered in shock, "Holy, that dog is trained for war." Sarah took a step forward, her expression calm and unshaken. She tilted her head slightly, listening to the leader's shaky breathing. "I told you," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "I warned you." The leader let out a strained grunt, his arm locked in Shadow's grip. "Oh, okay. Okay. I get it," he stammered. Sarah just smiled slightly. "Do you?" Shadow's grip tightened slightly. Not enough to break skin, but enough to send a message. The leader let out a small whimper. His pride was gone. His arrogance was gone. All that was left was fear. Real, raw fear. Sarah let the silence stretch. Let him feel it. Let him understand. Then, she spoke. You think you're tough? The leader swallowed hard. And no. You think picking on a blind woman makes you powerful? I swear, I didn't. Sarah leaned in slightly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. What do you think Shadow would do, if I told him to attack for real? The leader's entire body stiffened. His breath hitched. He knew. He knew what that meant. If Shadow actually attacked. If he actually bit down. There would be no escape. None. He would never stand a chance. And Sarah? She wouldn't even need to lift a finger. Because Shadow would do it all for her. The leader nodded frantically. Please. Just let me go. Sarah finally sighed. She gave Shadow a small, simple command. Release. And just like that, Shadow let go. The leader staggered back, clutching his wrist. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. He looked at Sarah. Then at Shadow. Then back at Sarah. His face pale as a ghost. I won't mess with you again. Sarah smirked. I know. The other bikers were already jumping on their motorcycles. They didn't need another warning. They had learned their lesson. Fast. The leader didn't say another word. Didn't even look back. He just stumbled toward his bike, started the engine with shaky hands, and sped off into the night. The others followed. Engines roared. Tires screeched. And then, they were gone. Running like cowards. Sarah let out a deep breath. The night was quiet again. Peaceful. Like nothing had ever happened. She reached down, giving Shadow a gentle scratch behind the ears. Good boy, she murmured. Shadow's tail wagged slightly. His job? Done. Sarah turned, walking away without a second glance. Because she didn't need to look back. She already knew. They wouldn't be coming back. Not now. Not ever. And with Shadow by her side. She never had to be afraid. Well. It looks like the bikers finally realized their mistake. But tell me, do you think they got off too easy? Or did Sarah and Shadow handle it just right? Let me know in the comments. And if you love stories where justice is served, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. The night air was still, but the bikers' fear hung thick like fog. Their once cocky grins. Gone. Their laughter? Silenced. All that remained was panic. Pure, raw panic. One of them tripped over his own feet, stumbling onto the pavement. Get up, man. One of his buddies hissed, eyes darting between Shadow and Sarah. The fallen biker scrambled to his feet, his hands shaking. Look, lady, we didn't mean nothin'. Just having some fun. Sarah tilted her head slightly, listening to the desperate quiver in his voice. Funny, she said, her voice steady, calm. I wasn't laughing. The leader, still rubbing his aching wrist, took a cautious step back. His hands were still trembling from Shadow's grip. He knew deep down if Sarah had given the word, Shadow could have ended him in seconds. And that thought? It terrified him. Shadow, still standing tall, watched them closely. He wasn't growling anymore. Didn't need to. Because his silence was louder than any bark. He took one slow step forward. That was all it took. Panic exploded in the group. Go, go, go. One of them yelped. The leader barely managed to jump onto his bike, fumbling with the keys as his fingers shook too much to start the engine. "Come on, man, hurry up!" another biker shouted, already revving his own bike. The leader finally got the engine to roar to life, and without another word, they bolted. Engines screamed. Tires skidded against the pavement. And just like that, they were gone. Running like cowards. Not looking back. Not daring to. Because deep inside, they knew. They had just messed with the wrong woman. And next time, there wouldn't be a warning. The park was silent again. Like nothing had happened. The cool night breeze brushed against Sarah's face, and she let out a slow, steady breath. She reached down, fingers finding Shadow's fur, feeling the warmth beneath them. "Good boy," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. Shadow wagged his tail, his job done. To him, this was just another mission. Another night. Another victory. Sarah stood there for a moment, listening to the distant hum of motorcycle engines fading into nothing. She didn't need to see them go. She knew. They wouldn't be coming back. Not now. Not ever. And if they did, they wouldn't make it far. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. Most people thought being blind made her weak. They thought she was defenseless. Helpless. A woman to pity. They never understood that sight wasn't power. Strength was power. Intelligence was power. Control was power. And tonight, Sarah had proved. She had all three. Some people thought justice meant revenge. Pain for pain. Eye for an eye. But Sarah? She knew better. She didn't need to hurt them. Didn't need to fight them. She just needed them to understand. And now, they did. By tomorrow, the story would spread. The bikers would talk. They would warn others. And the message would be clear. Don't mess with the blind woman and her dog. Because the next person who tried might not be so lucky. Sarah gave Shadow one last pat before turning away. Her steps were steady. Confident. Like someone who had never once been afraid. And Shadow? He walked proudly beside her, his tail wagging slightly, his ears still alert. A protector. A warrior. A true guardian. Together, they vanished into the night. Strong. Unstoppable. And ready for whatever came next. The bikers thought they had power. They thought they were in control. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea that Shadow was trained for moments just like this. The bikers' laughter was gone. No more smirks. No more taunts. Just fear. One of them tried to act tough. He forced out a nervous chuckle, but his voice cracked. We should go, man," one of them muttered, eyes darting between Sarah and Shadow. But the leader wasn't ready to back down. He was too proud. Too arrogant. He rubbed his wrist where Shadow had clamped down earlier. It still ached. His pride was hurt more than his hand. "You think we're scared of some dog?" The leader scoffed, stepping forward. Shadow didn't move. He didn't growl. Didn't bark. But his eyes locked on the biker's every movement. Sarah sighed. They still didn't get it? "You should be," she said softly. The leader scoffed again, but his voice wasn't as confident this time. Shadow took one step forward. That single movement, so small, so controlled, was enough to send a chill through the group. They felt it. They knew. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a weapon. A weapon trained to neutralize threats. And right now, they were the threat. One of the younger bikers, standing near the back, suddenly gasped. His eyes went wide. "Wait a second," he whispered. His voice shook. The leader turned, annoyed. "What?" The younger biker's hands trembled. He pointed at Shadow. I know that dog," he stammered. "I've seen dogs like him before. My uncle was in the military. He told me about them." The leader frowned. "So what?" The younger biker swallowed hard. "That's not just any dog." He took a nervous step back. "That's a Navy SEAL dog." A heavy silence fell over the group. The leader's face twisted in confusion. "What?" The younger biker nodded quickly. His voice was almost a whisper. "They train these dogs for war. For combat. They take down enemies. They can break bones in seconds. They don't stop until their target is neutralized." More silence. The group was frozen. Sarah simply stood there, calm as ever. Shadow sat by her side, completely still. Not barking. Not growling. Just waiting. Because he knew. He always knew. The leader was still trying to act tough. "I don't care if he's a SEAL dog or a circus dog," he snapped. But his voice? It was different now. The false confidence was gone. His hands shook. His breathing was quicker. The younger biker grabbed his arm. "We need to go," he hissed. "Now." The other bikers didn't hesitate. They turned and sprinted to their motorcycles. The leader was the last one to move. Sarah tilted her head slightly. "Still want to prove how tough you are?" she asked, her voice steady. The leader gritted his teeth. But he knew. He had already lost. Without another word, he ran to his bike, scrambling onto it. The sound of engines roaring to life filled the night. Within seconds, they were gone. Racing down the road. Speeding away like their lives depended on it. Because in a way, they did. As the roar of motorcycles faded into the distance, Sarah let out a slow, steady breath. She reached down and ran her fingers through Shadow's fur. "Good boy," she whispered. Shadow wagged his tail. To him, this was just another mission completed. Another threat neutralized. He wasn't scared. Because he never had to be. Not when Sarah was with him. And Sarah? She wasn't scared either. Because she knew. With Shadow by her side, no one would ever stand in her way. Some people thought justice meant violence. An eye for an eye. A punch for a punch. But Sarah? She knew better. She didn't need to hurt them. Didn't need to fight them. She just needed them to understand. And now? They did. By tomorrow, the story would spread. The bikers would talk. And word would travel fast. They would warn others. Tell them not to mess with the blind woman and her dog. Because next time, the next person who tried, might not be so lucky. She adjusted her coat, pulling it a little tighter around her shoulders. She and Shadow turned toward the street, their path clear once again. Her cane tapped gently against the pavement as they walked. Shadow stayed close, his ears still alert. The night air was cool and calm, just as it had been before. As if nothing had happened. As if the night itself knew. Sarah Carter had already won. And she always would. People always assumed she was weak. Helpless. Just another blind woman, lost in a world she couldn't see. But Sarah? She never needed eyes to see the truth. And those who underestimated her? They never saw her coming. Sarah continued walking down the sidewalk, her steps steady and confident. Shadow trotted beside her, his ears still alert, his head held high. To anyone passing by, they looked ordinary. Just a woman and her dog. Just another quiet evening. But if you looked closer, if you really paid attention, you would see it. The way Sarah carried herself. The way Shadow moved like a soldier still on duty. You would see that they were different. Stronger than anyone knew. Sarah had spent her whole life being underestimated. People spoke to her in soft, careful voices, as if she were fragile. They assumed she always needed help. They believed she was less capable, less aware, less strong. But Sarah knew something they didn't. She knew that true strength doesn't come from what you can see. It comes from what you know. What you believe. What you refuse to give up on. And that made her unstoppable. The bikers learned a lesson that night. They learned that strength doesn't always look the way you expect. They thought power came from size, from numbers, from making noise. But real power? Real strength? It comes from calm. From control. From knowing when to act, and when to wait. Sarah never raised her voice. She never panicked. She never even needed to fight. Because she didn't have to. She had already won the moment they assumed she was weak. And Shadow? He wasn't just a dog. He wasn't just a companion, just a helper. He was a protector. A guardian. A soldier who had seen more battles than most men ever would. He had fought in wars. He had saved lives. And now? He had one mission left. To protect Sarah. To stand by her side. To remind the world that she was never alone. Some victories are loud. They come with cheers, trophies, medals. But the best victories? The ones that truly matter? They are quiet. They happen when no one is watching. When no one is clapping. They happen in the small moments like the silence that followed after the bikers fled. The world kept turning. The night air remained still. But Sarah had won. And that was enough. People looked at Sarah and only saw what she lacked. They focused on her blindness. They never noticed her strength. Her wisdom. Her unshakable spirit. But that was okay. She didn't need them to see. Because in the end, their ignorance was her greatest advantage. They never saw her coming.